Hey guys, I wanted to show you how I adjust the settings in Trigger2 in order for it to be really effective and to translate well in the mix. So I'm going to have Trigger2 open up here, and as you can see, I have my snare top channel right here, and what I did is I right clicked and then I chose duplicate, and you'll have this pop-up window here, and I'm going to make sure everything's selected, and then I'm going to hit OK. Once you do that, then you'll have this identical track here. And what I did, this channel was actually a little too hot, so I clip gained down a little bit. And that brings me to my first point, which is the most important thing in using Trigger2 is you got to make sure your input signal is not clipping or is not too quiet. It has to be at a very nice consistent signal, or else you're going to have velocity hits that are not accurate to your natural snare hits. So the way you figure out the right consistent signal is you kind of go to the highest section of the song, and I'm just going to mute my drums for now, and then I'm going to have you look at this input signal. So you can see it's a little too hot here. I'm just going to go ahead and bring it down to around -2, and then kind of hit play again. So I want my loudest snare hits to just be at around -3, maybe even slightly above. And that's kind of a good amount of input signal. And if you're doing like a live session, then you're going to have to just create a new track and then make sure your input is the same from their snare top as your snare replacement, and or vice versa. So if, for example, if my snare top input was 2, I will make sure this input was 2 as well. And then I'll throw in the Trigger2. And if you're using Trigger2 for the first time, you're going to have to go to your settings, and you're going to have to find where you placed your samples. And once you do that, you'll go to your browser, and then you'll select your TCI files and then drop them down. So you can audition each TCI file by just deselecting the mute button and then clicking anywhere on this window. And this will hit activate the lowest velocity, and this will activate the loudest velocity. So there's actually more than 20 different samples within each TCI file, and there's 8 different velocities and then multiple variations of each velocity. So you're going to have a lot of variety in each TCI file. It's going to make it feel more natural with each different variation, which is really, really cool. And that's why I love Trigger2. I love the TCI file formats. I'm going to move on to this next section. I'm going to go over to the low cut. This isn't super important, but I like to bring this low cut to around 100 just so the Trigger2 will avoid, for the most part, the kick bleed that's going into the snare mic. And then this next step is probably the most important aside from the gain structuring, and this is the sensitivity and the detail values. So you'll see these 2 lines, and anything above or past these lines, Trigger2 is going to convert it into the snare replacement. And so the smaller the detail, the more likely any type of bleed will be converted into a snare. And the way to avoid this is by adjusting the sensitivity. So if my detail is at 0 and my sensitivity is at 100, any signal that's going to go into Trigger2 is going to be automatically converted into the snare. And I can hit play real quick. I'm going to mute my natural snares for now. And I'm also just going to solo my drums real quick. So let's do this section here. So these red dots means that everything's being converted into the sample. So I want to avoid that. And I personally like to bring in and convert my snare rolls, my softer snare hits into the trigger as well. Some people like to only convert the loud parts, the loud snare hits into the trigger. And if you want to do that, that's totally fine. You can just increase the detail so that only the big snare hits will come through and be converted. I don't like to bring my sensitivity to 100 ever. The most I would have it probably would be at around 80 or 85. So let's go ahead and play this. You can see the signal. This is all the snares. This is all the kick and the toms right here. And this is obviously your snare. So that's how you do it with the detail very really highly increased. This section of the song right here, the drummer is playing really soft ghost notes and a little bit of drum rolling. And so I like to pick that up as well. And so I'm going to actually decrease my detail to around 7. And at the same time, I'm going to have to decrease my sensitivity to around 47, 48. That way, the bleed of like the toms and the kick will be going past these two lines, but they won't be converted into the trigger. And I'm going to go ahead and hit play. Some of the snare rolls aren't getting picked up either, and that's kind of like a win-lose situation here, and that's going to be fine. We're going to have to adjust that with when you're mixing. But let's go over here to the section where it's pretty tom heavy and a lot of kick. And you're going to see that it's not going to be converting any of that bleed into the snare replacement. See, these are all tom hits, kick hits. None of those have been converted into a snare replacement. Only the snare. And that's because my sensitivity and my detail have been adjusted at the right settings. And let's go to this loud part here. That's pretty good. I'm going to look at these snare rolls real quick. I could even bring my detail down a little bit. Obviously, none of this is going to get picked up, which is kind of a bummer. But you're going to have to sacrifice a little bit because you don't want to mistake a kick for a snare because that'll be even worse. So after I do that, I adjust my sensitivity and detail. I make sure my signal of my replacement channel matches my top snare. And so I'm just going to look at it real quick. You can see my snare replacement is a little bit hotter, so I'm going to just decrease it here by the volume fader here, or you can decrease it here at your output volume knob. So that's gonna be it. You know, sometimes your sensitivity is gonna have to be a lot more or a lot less, and your detail has to be increased because of the bleed. It's just gonna be like a battle, and it's going to be something that you're gonna have to adjust. And so after I adjust my Trigger2, I insert an EQ below, and I make sure my snare replacement blends a lot better with my natural snare and the rest of the kit. And don't be afraid to use an EQ after the Trigger2. That's really important to make sure it blends, make sure it punches a little bit more. And I'm also using a little bit of compression, a 2-to-1 ratio here, just so it tickles like that -3 gain reduction. The only danger is to overdo it, so don't over compress, don't over EQ. And what I also like to do is I like to throw my snare replacement into my parallel drum bus. Not all the way to unity, but just enough to make it stand out. And so I'm gonna unmute my drum kit, and I'm gonna hit play. And this is kind of my method of mixing and blending the snares. So in the quieter moments, the triggers didn't really pick up those ghost notes. So I'm gonna have to really blend in my snare replacement as the drums get louder, as the snare hits get louder. After that, I can just leave it at a nice consistent level and just kind of leave it there. But that's kind of like one of the most important things when you're replacing the snare is you're gonna have to do a lot of automating, and that's okay because that'll keep you on your toes, keep you nice and sharp. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit play. This is just my natural snare, and now I'm gonna be blending it in. So that's pretty cool. I'm going to go to this section right here. And that's how I like to adjust my Trigger2 settings in order for it to translate well. Here's a little sneak peek of this live session that I captured, and I'm using my Trigger2. And this is how I mix with my Trigger2 replacement.